we have an update to our top trending story this week. Opposition leaders are pushing Prime Minister Justin Trudeau to respond to an online disinformation campaign from Russia, linking the Canadian and Ukrainian government to Nazism. Russian ministries are leaning into Canada's PM over an embarrassing incident in the House of Commons last Friday, where Canadian legislators and visiting Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy gave a standing ovation to a man who fought for the Nazis in the Second World War. In a now deleted tweet, Russia's embassy in the United Kingdom posted a fabricated photo of the man, Yaroslav Hunka, on a Ukrainian stamp with the caption, "They may apologize, but it's impossible to hide the nature of political regimes in Ukraine and Canada." The Canadian government has not released any statements countering the claims from Russia, even as opposition leaders push them to speak out. For more on this, we're joined now by media expert Mohit Rajhans, telling us more about disinformation, specifically in the European Union. Thanks for joining us today, Mohit.
Thanks, Matt.
What rules does the EU have to fight fake news?
Well, it's fascinating to follow what Europe's doing because they often do set the standard from a global perspective about how different countries are going to be able to tackle misinformation and disinformation. But the problem is they're still fragmented. So the European Union has a Disinformation Act, for example, that regulates a certain amount of things that social media companies need to look out for when it comes down to spreading disinformation and watching out for accounts that are bots, etc. But it also leaves it up to the countries to actually level up the fines and have separate issues dealt with based on certain legal and requirements based on age, etc. That really makes things complicated right now, especially at a time period where disinformation and misinformation is running so fast as a result of people being able to make this content and share this content on a record number of platforms.
Should social media platforms like X and Facebook do more to stop fake news in the EU?
Well, the bigger problem that I'm starting to see is that the fines that they're facing when it comes down to problems on their separate platforms are not really becoming a deterrent for social media companies to step up to the plate when it comes down to the impact of fake and disinformation on their networks. Instead, what we're seeing is that more tools are being made by social media companies for people to feel like they can be in their own bubbles, in their own niches. And that's proven to be problematic. With the end-to-end encryption in place, there's many people that share this information amongst each other that don't really have an idea of what's happening in the world outside. Without the ability for news companies and government-related agencies to be able to actually communicate with people at the same level on these platforms, what tends to happen is this vacuum, and that vacuum can be very dangerous when it comes to misinformation.
I want to turn now to what's happening with Russian disinformation about Canada and Ukraine. What should the government be doing in response?
Well, the bigger problem associated with what the government can and can't do is the fact that social media companies for years have been able to actually play by their own rules. And while you can sit there and say that we should be looking at more diplomatic relations so that we can understand the countries that we're having some misinformation issues with, or you might think to yourself, well, Canada should do better at promoting and protecting themselves from cyber attacks, which is part of misinformation. The truth is, we're in such a convoluted mess about the way social media companies and big tech can actually do business within this border that's a little hard to clean up. It's all after the fact. What are you going to do? Flag a bunch of bots that you think might be spreading misinformation and then hope that they don't appear the next day in rapid form? We're past that point. We're at a point right now where we need to understand that a lot of the digital literacy is going to be based on how we end up sharing our information amongst our fellow citizens.
Mohit Rajhans is an author and consultant for thinkstart.ca. Thanks for joining us today, Mohit.
Thanks for having me, Matt.